Yesterday, President Obama touched down for a historic visit to Cuba, being the first U.S. president to visit the island in 88 years. However, hours before Obama's arrival, Cuban authorities arrested as many as 50 protesters who were marching to demand improved human rights in the country. So this is obviously a huge moment, right? I mean, there's been over 50-year embargo placed on the country. So over this 3-day trip that Obama planned, he's meant to meet with officials and Cuban entrepreneurs as well as political dissidents in order to kind of thaw some of these Cold War hostilities. But what we noticed is even though today he's supposed to be meeting with Raul Castro to discuss human rights within the country, what had happened is right before he arrived yesterday, about 3 hours before, the Cuban government rounded up a bunch of different human rights activists there. So it's basically just raised the question as to whether or not, or rather what the president's role is in hoping to kind of expand this conversation of human rights.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think necessarily we should be overly surprised that what they've done is try to present a less embattled ground or less embattled country than they would wish to present. And so as a consequence, as egregious as that is, and rounding these individuals up, I don't necessarily think it's anything surprising.
Sure.
You know, listen, the view is that really the real powerhouse for change is going to be economic. So the lifting, and really they've already said that changing the one-party system is off the agenda, right? So that's just something they're not going to countenance, regardless of the fact that we're now, shaking hands across the ocean. So the thing that they're really keen on is the embargo and lifting that embargo. So that is ultimately going to be the driver for, and that's what's brought this about, I would suggest, and that what's going to be the driver for real socio-economic or socio change is going to be that, and that's that's clearly the ace in the hole, and the one that he's going to be able to leverage, the point that's going to be a leverage to greatest effect.
Right.
So until they really sit down, but this is, as you say, it's a historic visit,
yeah.
No question at all.
It's a historic visit, and I think that it's important to at least acknowledge, like, okay, this is happening, this is a good thing. But I do think it's important to at least look at the nuance there, because like we said, if we're trying to thaw some of these relations, but then within hours of him arriving, you're rounding up people to almost sort of paint a picture that isn't really there, it creates problems. So the group that I'm talking about specifically, it's a group called the Ladies in White. It was formed in 2003, and it's made up of the wives and female relatives of political dissidents that had been jailed unlawfully. So they protest every Sunday after Mass. They go and they march against the Cuban government. The assumption was that because Barack Obama was in town, that maybe there'd be a little bit lax security, but alas, that's not the case. So for them, they actually find it very important to be protesting while Obama is there, because they think that he has a stronger word or can send a stronger message to the Cuban government. On the other hand, there's other people such as Elizardo Sanchez, who's the head of the Cuban Council of Human Rights and National Reconciliation. He's a little bit more cynical. He's said before that money won't buy freedom with regards to, trade relations. And he had this to say about Obama's visit. He says, quote, "Neither President Obama nor the Cuban people expect spectacular changes. These kinds of regimes are repressive. It's necessary to maintain their power. So no matter what Obama says or does, it's impossible to put a good face on the human rights situation here in Cuba." So I think as of now, we're sort of at the point to see what kind of discussions he's having with Raul Castro, and whether or not it's going to go beyond trade relations and more towards human rights.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the other thing just to think about is the continued existence of Guantanamo Bay. And again, I'm not necessarily want to take this as an opportunity to bash Guantanamo Bay, but it is, because and the dismantlement thereof, but one of Obama's keystone or key projects on his manifesto when he was elected was that he was going to disband and dismantle Guantanamo Bay within 12 months, and he's just kicked that can down the road because it is such a political hot potato. Guantanamo Bay is still no close. I mean, there are less prisoners in there now than when he took office, but it's still no closer to being formally shut down than it was on day one. So, with that being said, it is somewhat difficult and precarious position to go in and talk to another country, and talk to particularly Cuba, about human rights records when you have something like Guantanamo Bay, which is such a rallying cry for jihadists, which is such a has been such a focal point for Amnesty International and other human rights organizational groups, because it is it's an illegal, it's something that it exists in that very grey, nebulous area of international law and arguably is illegal.
Right, you see that it seems a little bit counterintuitive to go to Cuba when we're...
hypocritical.
Yeah, let's be frank there.
So, but that being said, I mean, so it's difficult, but that's coming at it from a cynical lens. The non-cynical lens is, yes, this is an admirable visit, and one would hope that it's going to foster greater relations, and one would hope that would lead to greater improvement of human rights, and the fact that these people have been imprisoned is highly troubling. I also think it's quite a sweet name that they have for themselves, the Ladies in White. It sounds like sort of like a ladies' tea group or something.
Yeah, they
I'm sure they're not. I'm sure they're much more vociferous than that. But they do. It does make them sound quite sort of tranquil and sort of innocuous. Not innocuous, but
the white dresses. It's for peace. You know, they are trying to protest peacefully, which is another reason why they sort of assumed that they would not be rallied up. But I find it very interesting. I do think that this is a historic period in history. It will be very interesting to see the discussion with Raul Castro, what that will do for human rights within Cuba.